Hi, this is Ms. Mansky with your mini lesson for this week. We're going to continue our discussion of informational text and summary starting now. So last week we talked about how when you have an informational text, the subject is what the text is mainly about. It can usually be summarized in a single word. So last week the passage we looked at was about giraffes. The subject was giraffes. The main idea is a little more specific than the subject. It's what the author is saying about that subject. So in the giraffe example, the author was talking about how giraffes are the tallest mammals in the world. And then the supporting ideas uh, explain why the main idea is the main idea. They support it by giving it more information. So the text that we're going to look at today is about the Titanic, and I'm going to read it for you now. The British ocean liner Titanic sank in the North Atlantic Ocean more than 100 years ago. It was one of the worst shipwrecks in history and the most famous. The Titanic's tragic story is still the first to come to mind when people think of disasters at sea. On April 11, 1912, the Titanic steamed out of Queenstown, Ireland. This was the ship's last stop in Europe. The gigantic ship began its first Atlantic crossing to New York City. The Titanic was designed for high-style travel. It was also designed for safety. Its steel hull held 16 watertight compartments. Even if two compartments flooded, the ship would still float. Engineers agreed that the Titanic was practically unsinkable. On the night of April 14th, the Titanic was traveling at high speed, although there were warnings of icebergs. Lookouts were posted to search for the huge ice masses. Their binoculars were missing, so they used their eyes alone. Before midnight, the lookouts spotted a nearby iceberg. There was a quick attempt to steer the giant ship away, but the ship's side hit the iceberg. As a result, 5 compartments quickly filled with seawater. 2.5 hours later, the ship broke apart and sank. More than 2,200 people were on board. There were enough lifeboats for only half of them. When a rescue ship arrived at about 4 a.m., it picked up 704 survivors. Many lifeboats were only half full because of the confusion in loading them. The crew had not been trained in the procedures for use. The original design of the Titanic included lifeboats for nearly 3,000 people, but all these lifeboats would hang on the upper deck. That would mean high-paying passengers would not have a clear ocean view, so the number of lifeboats was reduced. The first-class passengers included the rich and famous, but hundreds of third-class passengers were confined to the lower decks. Only about one-fourth of them found their way to the lifeboats. The sinking of the Titanic was the biggest news of the day. It's still big news. Since that fateful night, countless books have described the moment-by-moment events on board. Songs have been sung about the courage of those who knew they were about to die. Movies have told the dramatic story, too. The stories inspired shipwreck hunters to locate the Titanic. They finally succeeded in 1985. Since then, deep-sea diving vessels have continued to explore the doomed ship's burial place. The ship's hull has been examined. Why did it fail? Some scientists argue that the steel became brittle in the ice-cold water and cracked easily. Another reason might be faulty iron rivets. The debate continues to this day. Many factors contributed to the tragedy of the Titanic. Many lessons were learned from it, too. So first, we want to think about what the subject of the text is. And remember, you can find the subject by looking at what words are repeated throughout the text. So in this particular text, the word that is repeated throughout is the Titanic, right? This text is about the Titanic. And we want to think about what point the author is making in this text about the subject. What's the main idea of the text? So it's not enough to just say that this text is about the Titanic. We want to say what the author is telling us about it, which is that it was one of the worst shipwrecks in history, and to this day is the most famous. That can be found in the text in that first paragraph, right? So all of the rest of the information we have about the text supports this idea that it was one of the worst shipwrecks in history and that it was the most famous. So what you're going to do for your exit ticket today is you're going to look for the words in the text that help explain why it was one of the worst and why it was one of the most famous shipwrecks in history. So you use this part of the passage as well as the second part on this other page. The exit ticket is multiple choice, and I will give you a little preview of it now. Looks like this. The question says, what are 3 details that support that this is the main idea? Select all that apply. That's all I have for you today. I hope you're having a good week and have a good weekend this weekend. Bye.